Welcome to Thomistic Womanhood. In today's video, we're going to do part 2 of spiritual motherhood, and this is kind of some concrete ways to put it into practice. In the first video, I kind of talked a bit about spiritual motherhood, what it is, how you want to discern between true and false suffering so you don't get walked on and manipulated. But in this video, I'm going to talk about some kind of concrete ways you can do that. So probably one of the first ones would be do something like help out at a soup kitchen, especially around the holidays. There's a lot of lonely people that are hard up on their luck and, they need food. There's a lot of homeless people out there. They need food. So, especially around the holidays, that's like a really hard time. So if you can, that's a great thing to do. We have an example of this in Little Women. If you've read the book, you'll remember on Christmas, their mother was like, okay, here's what we're going to do, girls. We're going to take our food and we're going to go give it to what they didn't call them back then that, the homeless. I think they had a home, but they were just these poverty-stricken neighbors. And they were like, we're going to give them our Christmas dinner. And so that was an example in a way of spiritual motherhood. The mother saw the need and was like, you know what, we're pretty good. We can get more food, but they can't. So let's do that. And helping out at a soup kitchen is kind of similar. This is not like Charles Dickens' time. We're not going to have people living down the street. I mean, maybe you will, that you could knock on their door and give them food. Maybe if you have a family in your neighborhood like that and they're open to it, because I think nowadays it's a little more delicate. Nobody wants to be on the receiving end of charity, even when they need that. And oftentimes if somebody who has fallen on hard times and they normally are really good at taking care of themselves and they're a normal person doesn't want to have to, rely on others for basic things like food and shelter. So that is something to be sensitive to, and why it's a little different nowadays. You can't just knock on someone's door and be like, here's a bunch of food. You can, but you have to be a little sensitive. You kind of have to know them. There has to be maybe a little rapport there. And that's why helping out at a soup kitchen is great because it's kind of it's an established thing, you're helping out and it's an established thing. So that's a good possibility. The next one, this is a little harder, but volunteer at any kind of orphanage or a group home with children. Maybe do something like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. This one is difficult. You have to have your own life kind of in order before you attempt to touch the life of a child. Because if that child gets to know you and gets attached to you, you don't want to necessarily walk out of their life if you, have a busy quarter at work or something and can't do it. So this is something you kind of have to be prudent about, and you have to be a stable person yourself. But, if you've pretty much got your career established, or maybe you work a lower stress, low pressure career and you have free time on the evenings and weekends, volunteering at something with children, we don't have, at least here in America, we don't have, strictly speaking, orphanages. But so it's kind of difficult. You can't just walk into an orphanage and be like, hey, I want to volunteer here, But maybe you can go on a missionary trip, I had a friend, she went to go help out in India. She volunteered in India for a while at a school and she taught the girls. There was an orphanage and they needed teachers in the orphanage. So she went there and she stayed out there for, I think it was 1 school year. She was out there and she taught the girls. And that was a great way because it was an orphanage and the teachers lived on site with the girls. And so my friend was able to, really get involved in their life on a closer level than maybe just a normal teacher would. And so that's a great opportunity, something like that. If your church or your college or something has some kind of volunteer program where you can help children, in any way, that's a great way to do it. But if it's not like that here in America, if you don't want to travel overseas, you want to help someone locally, then I would say something like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. That's something you could do. And then another one, this is one you probably want to get some kind of background training, or maybe unless you're already like a psychology major or something and you kind of have some training in this already, but you can join a suicide prevention hotline as a counselor. There's a lot of people that are very lonely and desperate, and they just need someone to talk to before they end up making a huge drastic choice that can't be reversed. And so these hotlines, it can be draining because you're hearing all day, every day, really sad stories. A lot of people that are suicidal, they have a reason for it. Like, you hear their life, you hear the kind of background they come from, and you're like, wow, I'm surprised you didn't do something like that sooner. Like, people go through a lot. It's amazing how resilient, I hate to sound cheesy, but it's amazing how resilient the human spirit is and how much we can go through and I don't want to say put up with, because a lot of people are not really putting up with it. They're kind of just barely making it through life. But yeah, joining one of these hotlines and just kind of working as a counselor and just working the phones, that can be something to do, you could do. And like I said, it can be draining. If you're very empathetic, you'll do great, but the drawback is that you may kind of take on some of the suffering. You may internalize some of their pain, and it can stress you out. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to pace yourself a little bit, you know, look at your life, look at your sensitivity, maybe talk to your family and ask them, like, do you think I'm the kind of like emotionally sensitive person to be able to handle this? Or, you know, maybe they're like, yeah, you know, or just do it one day a week or something, you know, maybe don't do it like every night after work, but, you know, but it's something to look into. Also, you want to make sure that you have some kind of background in this. If you have never experienced like trauma or abuse from families or your family, and you don't want to get on a call and kind of like judge the person and be like, oh, it's not that bad, I don't understand why, you know. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't understand why people could get suicidal, like, I just don't get it, you know, because not everybody understands that, you know. Maybe you came from a really good family and you would do great at one of these other options, you know, maybe this one just isn't for you. So you need to have some sort of background and knowledge of like trauma and abuse, because most people that are thinking about suicide are going through it because of some kind of trauma. Something that happened to them was really horrible and it just killed their desire to live. I mean, really. So that's something you need to kind of understand, you know, maybe not through experience, but you need to kind of get it on some kind of level, you know, before you can try to bring comfort to someone like that. So that's why I say, like, you want to kind of have maybe some kind of a background in it, whether that's through like studying psychology or personal experience, you know. So the next one, provide abortion counseling. There are a lot of women that, you know, they have abortions because they don't really think they have a better option. They're not always like terrible people that, you know, because a lot of times people are like, oh, that's so horrible. Like, how could you do that to your own child? And there is something shocking and horrible about it. But a lot of times, if you talk to these women, they usually have no idea what else to do. Maybe the father abandoned them when he found out they were pregnant. Maybe their parents kicked them out of their home, or just something like that. You know, there are women that really just didn't see any way out, and that's why they're considering this. And there are like hotlines and things like that. You know, there's like centers, abortion counseling centers that women and girls can go to in person, or there's also like hotlines that you can kind of like be on the call on the hotline. And so in either of those cases, again, you need to be sensitive and not be like judgmental about it, and just remember, like, there but for the grace of God go I, you know. I think somebody once said that we are all one traumatic circumstance away, or one traumatic event away from being a completely different person than who we are today. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. We often think like, oh, I'm this kind of person and I make these kind of choices and I would never do that, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we don't really know. If we got put in that situation, who knows, you know, maybe we would find ourselves considering that too. I hope not, but you never know. And so that's why if you want to do this, it's a great thing to do. And it's also, there is something particularly beautiful about helping another woman kind of rediscover her own maternal instincts. In a way, your maternal instinct of helping someone less fortunate and having care and concern for someone who's suffering, because considering an abortion is a sign of suffering. That girl is usually suffering somehow that she's even having to consider that, usually. You know, there are girls that come in there and it's a selfish choice and they just don't want to deal with a baby, and okay. But there are other women that are not necessarily that far gone, and, you know, you can really help them. And so it is, you know, it's a beautiful thing to help another woman rediscover, you know, her maternal instincts and you know, that part of her nature, because I think these abortion centers have kind of collated data. I don't think they've like done studies on it, because this is not the kind of thing, it's too politically charged. I don't think people are actually like conducting full-scale studies on this, but I have heard a lot of women, after they have abortions, it really messes with them psychologically. If this woman has any kind of, you know, maternal instinct, and most women do. There was a girl, I don't know if you guys have heard of the group TLC. They were like a R&B girl group back in like a long time ago. I'm kind of dating myself, but they were, I think it was back in the 90s. They were kind of like Destiny's Child before there was a Destiny's Child. It was 3 women, and you know, they sang like these like hip hop songs. Well, one girl in the group, there's 3 of them, and one of them, I think it was Left Eye. She ended up having an abortion, and she's gone on record. Like, you can search for her on YouTube and hear her talk about it. She had an abortion, and it really, really hurt her on like a psychological and emotional level. And she said it took her a long time to get over that. And so this is a really great thing to do, to be counseling women and girls that are in that situation and try to help them see just, you know, that there are options. You know, there's better ways. I don't want to say better ways to handle it, but there's a way through it, you know. So anyways, that's one of them. Another one, maybe a lot less dramatic, is starting a blog where you answer readers' letters and you counsel them through a problem. So this is common. This has been going on for years, decades. You know, before blogs, we had like Ann Landers or Emily Post. You know, people would write into Emily Post about etiquette, I believe it was, and then Ann Landers, I think, was like housekeeping kind of stuff, or I don't know. Ann Landers, she was more like kind of a social commentary woman. I remember she had a column in the newspaper when I was a kid. But basically, the gist of it is you receive letters or messages. You know, nowadays it's like comments on your blog or even like a YouTube channel, kind of like this. But you basically hear your reader's problem and you give them advice on it. And that can be, one, it's very receptive. You know, I notice a lot of women do this and they're really good at it. When you hear about someone being good at this, it tends to be a woman, at least in my experience. Maybe I'm just biased and I'm only noticing it with women, but I do notice that like whenever a letter writer gets really famous, I don't know. But anyways, yeah, so people write you a letter or a comment or a message about some kind of social problem or, you know, an etiquette thing or housekeeping or whatever area that you have expertise on, you basically kind of become this person's consultant and you give them advice on it. And then you like post the answer on your blog or you make a YouTube video about it or whatever. And so that can be a form of spiritual motherhood, you know. One of the spiritual works of mercy is to instruct the ignorant or to counsel the doubtful. So depending on the subject that your blog or whatever is about, you know, you can be doing a lot of good there. Again, that's something you want to have some kind of a background and a formation in, depending on the gravity and the seriousness of the question you're taking. Obviously, if it's something like, you know, homemaking, like that's not a big deal. But like with the abortion example, you know, you could be providing advice on some really serious life decisions. So it's something you kind of have to weigh a little bit. But yeah, that's another good option. You can teach someone catechism. That's another one. That really puts the spiritual in spiritual motherhood. Because, you know, teaching someone the faith is an excellent thing to do because you're giving them a gift. It really is like the gift that keeps on giving, you know. think back. If you're not Catholic, Catechism is basically like, it's the doctrines of our faith. You're teaching somebody about Catholicism and what everybody in Catholicism believes and why they believe it and how that all works out. And you can teach children catechism or you can teach adults catechism. So depending on your level, like for those of you that are just like Catholic geeks, like I'm kind of a Catholic geek, and I love finding out all the theological reasons behind why we believe what we believe and so on. And so depending on what's, open in your church, maybe they need someone to teach the children catechism after Mass on Sunday, or maybe maybe there's like a women's Bible study that they want you to lead. Maybe you're watching this and you're like, you've been married, you're an older woman, you've seen some life, and maybe you'd be a good person to teach the younger women. I think it was St. Paul that said, let the older women instruct the younger women. I don't remember the verse, but I feel like he said something like that, similar. And I think it's very true. There is something about life as a woman, especially when it comes to like dating and relationships, that I really do feel like older women have a lot of wisdom about that should be imparted to younger women. So that's a little slightly different than catechism, but whatever. So that's that. And then here's a really simple one. I'm gonna close with like the really easiest one, but if somebody's suffering and they need someone to talk to, just talk to them, just lend a sympathetic ear. That's a great way to do it. And it's often, if you're hearing this and you're like, wow, all of these things are so structured, my life is so random, I don't know if I could commit to doing one of these things, then just commit to really like being there for your friends, being there for your family, and just try to make a point to listen and pay attention to people. Because a lot of times when people are suffering, they're not just going to come right out and tell you. They're going to try to like test the waters a little bit, and they'll give like a very subtle little cry for help, and you have to be able to pick up on that. A lot of times us women, the world kind of shoves it down our throat that we should have these like, education, these high-powered careers, yada, yada. And that's fine, but it does leave us very preoccupied. And it's hard for us to pick up on when someone around us is suffering and needs someone just to talk to. And so that's something to be aware of. That can be a form of spiritual motherhood. You're being nurturing and you're being loving and you're providing that emotional support to someone. Because isn't that one of the nicest things about a mother? When you're young, she changes your diaper and she feeds you and she puts food on the table for you to eat and cooks it, But as you get older, we often value from our mothers their emotional support, just the fact that, they're there when you need them and they just listen, and so having someone to listen really means a lot. So anyways, those are a bunch of ideas. I hope that was helpful. I hope that was some food for thought. So anyways, yeah, like, share, subscribe, whatever. If you have a question, leave me a comment. That'll be that.